So again, welcome. We're so happy that you guys were able to join us today on the second session of Virtual Agronomy 101 course. If you are participating for the first time, welcome to the course. We are meeting here every Thursday of the week to talk digital ag, virtual agronomy, and how to help agronomists strengthen their relationship with their grower in 2020. I recommend you check the recording of the first session that is found on our webpage, just to get acquainted with the outline and why we're putting this together. We talked about some cool stuff last week. And also you're welcome to join a group of participants that have chosen to explore the platform during this course. So just go to request access on Fluorosat page, fluorosat.com/fluorosense, and hit the request access button. So if you're new, welcome. If you're coming back and you've joined us last Thursday, it's great to see you again. Thank you for taking the time to join us this week as well. And thank you for sending in lots of questions. It's been really overwhelming and awesome, the questions that you guys sent in, because it's helping us create this course in a way that helps you and brings value to the questions that you're looking for. So, and actually a lot of the questions that you sent inspired today's topics and today's things that we want to discuss. So thank you, keep the questions coming. It's all helpful to make sure that we're building content that you're asking for. Some housekeeping before we start to go over. So this session is also recorded. You will have a link in the recording shortly after the end of this webinar. And your microphones are muted, so we can't hear you, but that doesn't mean that you can't message us. So please do. Please message us throughout the webinar with your questions. Using the chat button. So you see the chat button, click on it, ask us questions throughout the webinar. We're gonna dedicate we're gonna have a live Q&A towards the end of the webinar. And then we're gonna be asking those questions. We're gonna be discussing them with Matt, with myself, and we'll see like what if we could be of helpful. So please, Q&A button, click on it, chat to us, send us your questions. And also don't forget to share and tag and tweet us at Fluorosat using the hashtag virtualag. And thank you for everyone who's actually shared the hashtag. This week we have grown. There's been a lot of more signups for the course. We grew from 260 people signed up last week to about 350 people this week. So spread the word. If you feel like this is helpful or someone would see value in this course, please let them know. Invite your agronomist, invite anybody who's curious about precision ag and virtual agronomy and wants to learn. That's why we're here. We're here to share our experience and help answer any question that you might have. Today's session is very exciting. One of the biggest reasons why it's exciting is because we have Matt on board. Hi, Matt. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us on this webinar. Matt Westerhouse is the Crop Sensory Division Manager with Heartland Soil Services. We're very excited that you're on board. You've been working with precision ag and virtual agronomy since 2013. It has evolved so much since then, and you've been practicing that talking the talk and walking the walk. So that's what we want to take advantage of having you on board today, to have you tell us a little bit about your workflow, your experience, what's been working, how you've been successful using those tools, how those tools made you efficient and enhanced your relationship with your grower. So again, thanks for being on the webinar. Let me just click through this. Please feel free to revisit this slide if you'd like to know more about what the rest of the course outline will look like. Today's session is Timing is Everything, Staying Ahead of the Game Throughout the Season. In this session, we're going to talk about how being proactive, how looking at multiple data and collecting and aggregating those data sets so you can create intelligence from it. A bit of a further dive into today's session. We're going to start by talking about different types of data. And that was one of the questions a lot of you guys reached out and asked us about that. So we've dedicated some time today to talk about the remote sensing type of data and others. So we'll start talking about types of data that's available. And then we're going to take a poll about what you guys are using the most, what kind of data you're familiar with. Then we're gonna dive into the least familiar type of data, which is the remote sensing data type. Then we're gonna talk about how combining those multiple data sources to create a piece of information that can influence a decision. We will discuss multiple examples where we had aggregated. Let's look at the weather, let's look at the image, let's look at the farm information. And then we're gonna reach a point where we have a piece of information that could help you make a decision. We have about 4 examples we're gonna walk through today. And then the last section, we're gonna focus on what we call the virtual handshake, which is how do you communicate this information to keep your grower engaged, to give him visibility, to give him confidence, and to make sure that you and him are both being proactive and being ahead of the game. So let's start. Let's start by addressing the data types. It all starts with good data, and indeed, I think I can speak about that at least 20 minutes, what good data is and what bad data is. Good data is the fact that you've measured properly, you've calibrated, you've been accurate, because if your data is not clear, it's only gonna mess up a lot of the analysis. So assuming we're talking about good data here. Weather has been a major source of data in ag. Actually, it was funny when I Googled it, it said since 1654, weather has been a huge, major source of ag and decision, which makes complete sense. And this has been around for a while and used extensively, and what most of us are very familiar with. Another piece of data that we are familiar with is farm data, and that's what a lot of you agronomists are familiar with. You're using it to provide your services. That's what you do at Heartland Soil Services. You aggregate this data, you look at it with the farmer, it helps you make a decision. For example, like soil data, yield map data, when did you plant, when did you harvest, what variety did you take? And other files like nitrogen, variable rate nitrogen application or irrigation maps or stuff like that. So actually, let me ask you this, Matt. What are the cool data sets that you've been looking at, or can you tell us what's the latest, what's new data from sensors or technologies? What are you excited about? What have you been collecting?
Yeah, I'd say that some of the newest and most exciting technology and data sets that we're getting to utilize right now is an endeavor that we've put together called the CropSafe Network. And CropSafe is a network of data collection locations currently in the Midwest United States and also in the San Joaquin Valley of California. And we're in our initial data set, we're collecting daily and monitoring daily insect pressure through a smart trap that takes an image of a species that we're targeting with a specific pheromone lure and gives us an updated count every day. And what we do at CropSafe is take that numerical data and we map it on in a visual representation of kind of a heat map, if you would, or it's very similar to like a Doppler radar for weather even. I mean, what we're doing is mapping insect pressures and progressions across large regions and watching those develop and change. And this past year was the first year for our main collections. And this year we've now added some more capability to that. We've added weather. We're feeding in the system weather data, and we're using phenology models for certain species to predict certain events in the species life cycle that we're monitoring. So like corn earworm would be an example. When we see a peak in the corn earworm or the first peak of the season in corn earworm moth flight, we set that as biofix and then use phenology modeling and growing degree days to predict like when the next egg hatch would be, when the next significant phases are in that next generation and the current generation life cycle, to give our producers a better understanding of the timing so they can use products more effectively and hit the timing right. And that's probably the newest and most exciting thing we got going on. But we also use a whole lot of other sensors and technologies, imagery, yield data, as applied data, that farm data that you've talked about already, soils information. We utilized some technology to help our producers schedule irrigation more efficiently, and also high resolution aerial imagery is kind of our what I initially came to the Heartland team for, and we've since built out a whole department around crop sensing devices and the services we can build around it.
Yeah, and this has been what a lot of agronomists are excited about lately, the imaging part, which is the third data source that we're going to talk about today. And it's been your experience. You've been working with imagery, different platforms of imagery, and that's something I want to take a minute to look into a little bit deeper, which is the remote sensing data. We're talking about images that could come from satellite, from planes, from drones, from different platforms. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but let me first ask you guys this question. After we have learned from Matt what kind of imaging he's familiar with, what kind of maps and what kind of data that he is collecting, let's get to know a little bit to understand everybody's experience participating today. So I'm asking you, what spatial data are you most familiar with? Let's conduct this brief poll about the type of data that you are familiar with. Thank you everybody for answering. I see a lot of people choosing soils and yield. That's quite common. Okay, let's wait for everybody to log in their answers in a minute. Perfect. Thank you everybody for answering. So as you could see, let me share the results with you to see what we had. 35% of you said that they're familiar with satellite data. Coming after that, soil maps, expected. And I'm really glad that imagery is satellite imagery being something that you're excited about and you're familiar with. To a lesser extent, there's imagery that's coming from fixed wing or imagery that's coming from drones. So thank you for answering that. And let's talk a little bit about it. Let's talk about the different types of data. Perfect. Okay, so these different platforms to enable imagery, just like how you're capturing information about the soil, how you're capturing information about the weather, a big piece of the puzzle and something that is brought in by the overview, by the bird's eye view that you get with imagery is multiple, is of great magnitude. To obtain imagery, there's multiple sources of it. It could be through the platform of the satellite. For example, on the Fluorescence platform, you would see automatically, it will be automated retrieval of all of the Sentinel data. That Sentinel is the name of the satellite. It has a 10-meter resolution pixel. The sensor on that satellite platform is multispectral. That means we're capturing light in the red, the green, the blue, and actually 12 different bands. The price of this imagery is almost free. It is available, but you do need to run on top of it some algorithms that have to do with cloud cover and other enhancement and corrections. The scale and the timing is also very convenient for the Sentinel. You could have an image every 5 days. Every 5 days is the revisit time to go over where it last imaged. Not all imagery are useful because sometimes, because it's satellite, think about that platform, sometimes there's a lot of clouds, so the imagery is not really useful, but it's there, it's helpful, it's really powerful in row crops specifically. Another source of data would be the data you would capture on using a manned aircraft. The resolution differs by what kind of sensor is on the manned aircraft. Is it you could get anything from a 3-meter resolution to 9-centimeter resolution. Also, on the manned aircraft, it could be equipped with a multispectral imagery. It could be equipped with a thermal camera. It can have multiple sensors, and you could capture multiple data sets. It's reasonably affordable, and it's regional. And ideally, those flights happen at key times when, example, right before bloom, right before in apple orchards or in fruiting trees. It happens when a management practice is being performed before harvest to identify where harvest needs to be. So we try to think about it as in what are the key times that we need this resolution for. Another layer of information comes from drones. So drone is the drone, a multi-rotor or a fixed wing. It's an unmanned aerial vehicle, and the resolution also differs as a function of the sensor. It can also carry multiple sensors like multispectral or thermal. Usually it's something you can fly yourself. So that means you could do it at any time, at any point, whenever you feel like you need a bird's eye view, or you want to capture an imagery, you can just deploy one and send it out there.
I might add something when I'm looking at different imagery sources and what may be the best fit for some of my customers. Usually what we're asking ourselves is, what's the highest resolution that we really need to answer a problem or answer a question or solve a problem that we're utilizing the imagery tool for. So sometimes it is satellite. Other times, if we're trying to assess the effectiveness of a center pivot irrigation system or a subsurface drip system, the manned or drone is more effective. And even when we're looking at stand counts or something, then definitely a drone. So use the tools kind of as separate tools. They're not, imagery isn't just imagery, I guess. There's definitely different tool sets within it. So be strategic, I guess, as you choose those tools.
Exactly, and the way that I recommend, like, I get that question a lot. What platform can I use? What sensor? What would make sense? Usually, what I recommend and what I find to be useful is a combination of those three. Getting the overview, getting the constant sentinel image that is available at the 10-meter resolution, using the plane data to find those key events, for example, inspecting a chlorosis event or identifying a stressed area or as such, and then using the drone at a smaller scale. If there's a specific area, for example, that you're monitoring, if there's an area that you've done a management practice and you want to assess it, did it actually recover? Have my pruning practice been uniform, like stuff like that. And I'm going to show in a little bit about what each application, what kind of resolution it needs and what kind of sensor it needs. The question about resolution is also key. What you highlighted, Matt, is also very key. I get that a lot, like, what is the resolution? What do I need? The rule of thumb I use is, what are you looking for? Are you trying to find a tree or are you trying to find a flower? There's a difference in dimension between a tree and a flower. So think about it. If you're trying to find a tree, you at least need to have 3 pixels over that tree. If you're trying to find a flower, you at least need to have 3 pixels over that flower. So using that logic would help you decide, like, what is the resolution that I need? Or what is the platform that I need to get my data on? And something more exciting about the platform is the sensor itself. I'm a strong believer of the values in the sensor. All these platforms, like, they all work. They're different types. They do different things, different coming to play at different times. But what's key is, what is the sensor capturing? So all these different platforms could have sensors that are multispectral, that captures light in the blue, the green, the red, the multiple red edges, and in the near infrared. So what is the magic? What are we trying? Why imagery tell us something about the plant? I find this graph to be very helpful to explain this idea, which is trying to differentiate between a healthy plant and a stressed plant. So a healthy plant and a stressed plant do not look the same. Even for our visual eye, because we only look in the RGB, we can look at them and we, at some point, we'll able to pick up one is greener than the other. But there are other bands that can differentiate those two trees or those two crops, that one is healthy and one is stressed, before we're able to see it in the RGB. And those two bands, for example, this graph highlights the red edge band and the near infrared band. So in the near infrared band, you could see that the healthy plant is reflecting more light compared to the stressed plant. So when I capture imagery, I get two numbers. I get two values for the near infrared. One value is higher. That's the healthy one. The one with the lower near infrared is the stressed one. The same applies to the red edge. As you could see, the red edge, it's that steep curve right here. And this steep curve helps you, this slope in the red edge helps you distinguish between the healthy and the unhealthy. Now, why is the near infrared reflected differently? It's a function of the crop health. It's a function of if the leaves are fluff, because near infrared depends, it scatters inside the leaf. So if the leaf is thick and it has water, it's good. It's going to be reflecting more. If the leaf is tired and sick or wilting, it's going to reflect near infrared because there's less thickness for that light to enter the leaf. So these are individual ingredients that from them, what we do is we build indices. We're not going to talk about tree health and only look at the near infrared. The power of this information is when combined. So let's combine it, and that's what we do with indices. Think of indices as scores. I'm going to score my plant. The NDVI is a very known index. It's an index that, as a function, we use the information in the near infrared and in the red. So we get those two numbers. It's the ratio of their subtraction over their addition. You end up with a number that goes from 0 to 1. And this is a score. For example, you see the healthy plant scored 0.72 as compared to the stressed plant that scored 0.14. There's multiple vegetative indices. They differ by what the relationship is to the crop parameter. For example, NDVI is a good indicator of the biomass. NDRE, which is another score, is an indicator of the chlorophyll, as well as the chlorophyll index, the CCCI. Not all of them work all the time. They get saturated. NDVI, for example, gets saturated mid-season and beyond when it comes to corn and other row crops. So that's a limitation. So that's when, for example, you would switch into another score that would give you a highlight of how my crops are doing, which one's doing better, which field is performing better. So that's a quick overview about remote sensing and some basics. I did get some questions from some advanced users that were asking me about specific sensors and what type of imagery. That's what you mentioned, Matt. And I wanted to provide some background and some examples of, for those of you that are less familiar. So RGB, best used for plant counting, stand count, visual inspection. This is the Microsense red edge or multispectral sensor. Multispectral sensors, they're really good for crop health because they have the red edge band on addition to the RGB. They have red edge and near infrared. And there's also the thermal sensors. Thermal sensors are also excellent for identifying leaks and irrigation effects and crop stress. For more information, we've actually put together some detailed drone guide on our website. So please go to the website, download a drone guide, and it's gonna walk you for the whole process of like all the way from how to pick the platform to what kind of sensor you need, all the way to what you can actually do with it. So make sure you check out that drone guide and download it from the website. So what is coming next is more exciting about the data. I get excited about the data when I'm looking at Excel sheets and row numbers, but the real power, the real magic is when you combine those data. You look at multi-layers and then you create an intelligence. You create a story, you create information that you're able to take action on. So let's look at some examples, and some examples are gonna look familiar for you, Matt. This is actually one of the farms that you were consulting on last year. So what am I looking at? Just to, for those that are following up with us on their computer, this is a pivot that is planted by corn, I believe. Let's say there. So this is a pivot that was planted. I'm looking at the plane imagery that was captured on the 31st of May. So what was identified from that image, that there is a whole big area towards this side of the pivot that is really stressed compared to everything else. And the growth is not uniform. Everywhere else it's going okay, except for this area. So this is what the intelligence that we were able to build from the image. Adding on top of that, as you could see here, this is the exact size of the area that was identified as stressed, the 17.48 acres. And then someone's saying that the sound is not good on their end. So are you guys hearing me okay? Are you hearing me good, Matt?
Yeah, you're good on my end.
Okay, okay. So yeah, so back to the example. So from the imagery, we were able to infer that there is an area that is problematic. Adding a piece of information on top of that, let's look at the weather. You could see that on that specific day, 2 days or that day exactly, there was some heavy rainfall that went down on that area. Could you tell us, Matt, a little bit more about what putting these two pieces together, those different sources of data, what were you able to do with it?
Yeah, so last year we did have pretty significant rainfall events here in South Central Kansas during planting, and it delayed a lot of planting. And then once we got corn on the ground, there were some big rain events that came again. Like I think in one instance, I think in 48 hours we had close to 8 inches of rain. So what we're able to do with this information, the reason you need the weather data on top of the image is because it's when you're using remote sensing tools to gather insights, you see one piece of the puzzle or one layer of the information. And so by bringing multiple layers together, you start to kind of a lot like forensics or something like that. You're putting bring all the necessary information in together. So we were able to take measurements like this and get that to the grower, so he knew the impact of the rain events, and we proved, we knew it was most likely due to rain. And then he sent this to his farm service agent, where he was able to turn that in for a yield loss event or crop loss event. There's some government programs that help with some replant financing and things like that to help get back on track for the season.
Yeah, I mean that's one way to take advantage of the fact that you're able to spatially see the extent of the damage, and then take one of the actions that you described, or assess: am I going to replant? What is the size? How much do I need? What are the actions that I need to start working on? Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Are the economics worth the replant decision, or is there not enough area affected where it wouldn't make sense to replant, and you'll be better off just letting it ride it out for the season? Absolutely.
Yes, and a similar example where this time the weather event was actually frost. So this is also this is the satellite imagery. So now we're looking at a sentinel imagery captured on the 7th of September. This is a field that, when looking, just analyzing the NDRE, which is a score that I've mentioned that tells us about the chlorophyll content, we saw that there is this area right there where you see the size that had a very significant growth difference compared to everything else. And also when inspecting the weather, we were able to see the relationship between that event of the frost that happened that day and then the damage that was verified in the field. This is an excellent tool to help us quantify the size, the extent, how much acreage has been destroyed or has been affected by the frost. A couple days later, after they harvested, it was about a month, 3 weeks later, on the 28th of November, the grower also uploaded his yield map, and you could see the correlation between the area that was affected by the frost and the area that had a much lower yield compared to everything else. Another example that I put together, and this is dedicated for the research agronomists on the call that are involved in plot size analysis. This plot size is pretty cool because it has 3 things going on at the same time, but let's zoom in a little bit so we could look a little bit closer to it. As you can see here, there are multiple trials. So I'm going to be talking about starting from the left hand, talking about these 2 and then moving in that direction. So the very first two plots that are a total of 6 rows, you could see that we're trying to estimate what was the emergence. So those are 2 different varieties, and what imaging, along with information that came from the farm, what kind of variety was planted, what was the spacing, all of that, we're able to identify what was the emergence percent between those 2. Was variety A had more emergence success, at what time? You have the capability to drive that level of intelligence from it. The second to your right, to my right, the second 2 plots those were planted a little bit later, and we're trying to track what was the crop cover over those 2 different varieties as well. For example, you could see that the very first one has reached a crop cover of 30% compared to the other one that had a crop cover of 37%. And that's key here also to understand what was the planting density, because you need to make sure that your decision, you're not saying that, oh, this one is growing more. It could be that I have actually planted more. So let's go back and emphasize the importance of multiple layers of data. I just used my on-farm data now by understanding what was the density. I used my imagery by understanding what was the crop cover. Combined, I'm able to assess if variety A is better than variety B. And the same thing applies that this part was also planted the very first, and we're trying to track what was the crop cover. And the same logic that applies to plot sizes can also be applied to a pivot. So this is a pivot. We're looking now at imagery that was captured by Turabian, by a manned aircraft provider. And I'm looking at the NDVI. So looking at the NDVI here, I'm going to zoom in into the eye information. I'm able to identify the planting date, the harvest date, the NDVI, and estimate the growth stage. So I'm able to estimate the growth stage based on the growing degree days, based on what I'm seeing in the imagery. And I'm also able to report on the canopy cover. For this pivot, it's 70%. And this could be very helpful if you are looking into the case where you are an agronomist and you have about, let's say at least you have 5 pivots that you're keeping track of. So what this combination of data could do for you is that it can tell you that in pivot 1, I have variety, which is Shepherdy in this case. Its growth status is it's in development, it's going good, and its NDVI score is 0.57. The second set of pivots that I'm looking at, the second one, this is also the same variety. So in theory, I should expect both of them to be in the same stage and they were planted at the same time. But I do see that this pivot 1 NDVI score is higher than pivot 2. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So you can watch it and see, is 2 gonna pick up to get back to 1, understanding what was the planting density and all of that. And the very last thing is you have here another set of pivots. Obviously, they are of a different variety. Now we're talking about the Clearwater russet. And we see that they have not emerged yet. So that's an overview that you as an agronomist can use to track the growth, the crop stages, and where growth is going steady, where it's going fast. Another example we put together was this example that came from a data set from using the Microsense sensor. So this is a drone data. Drone data and trees come in a lot of cases hand in hand because of the high value of the single trees. So this is the case where we've looked at drone data on the 23rd of April. As you could see, it was hard to see anything in the NDRE. by applying the the tree detection, we were able to find individual trees. So instead of looking at soil plus tree plus shadow, now we're only looking at the tree. And what the grower noticed was there was this area that was performing a little bit lower than everywhere else. And he was concerned. He was like, what is going on? So he went out there and he took some tissue sampling. He took some leaves from healthy trees and from single trees. And to find out the exact trees, he used this capability to show me the worst 15% of my trees. So by identifying those individual trees, he went out there, he took the sample, some leaves from them, he took some healthy leaves, and he took them to the lab. So now we're looking into another source of data, what came from the lab. The lab came back saying that those chlorotic leaves are struggling with high bicarbonate levels, and it's coming from the irrigation water. So the grower could either treat the soil to adjust the soil pH, or they could wait to receive the first run of surface water that's gonna come directly from the snow melt that's coming from the Sierras. And that's what they did. They said, okay, we're not gonna spend money on washing off the field. We're gonna wait and just wait to receive the first run coming from the fresh, good water. And that's what they did. They waited, it flushed the soil, and then they flew a couple weeks later. This is actually a picture of how the healthy and the chlorotic plums in his orchard. After they actually came back with the imagery and they waited, the water flushed the soil, the pH, the salt off. They did fly later on. So the first imagery was in April, the second imagery is in June, and they noticed that all of those individual trees have regained their color. And the problem was addressed. So imagery was more of a confirmation that indeed this management practice have worked. It could be the case where no, it did not work. They're still struggling. You need to go and do something else. And that's the information that we're trying to create. That's the information where it helps bring to the picture by aggregating those multiple data sets. I just want to take a moment to take a look, just take a step back and observe this dynamic loop that we have created. So instead of thinking about the data as being static, no, the data is happening, is being captured, the measurements, all of that is happening throughout the growing season. It goes into agricultural models, it goes into algorithms, and then it predicts, it tells you there is a stress or there is a yield problem or there's a yield loss. And that's where you as an agronomist are gonna come in and be like, okay, I'm gonna go confirm. Because you need to diagnose the reason of the stress. You need to verify that indeed this stress exists or this problem exists. And then we also get the imagery that's coming through the remote sensing, and there's this learning curve. There's this fact where you're correcting for what you're looking at, you're looking into enhancing your decision. So it's no more the case of like early in the season, I collect data and at the end of the season, I see what happened. It's throughout the season. It's throughout the season that you're able to enhance your estimation. Because at the end of the day, what is a yield estimate? There's multiple components that need to exist throughout the season to reach a good yield estimate, or at least your own predicted yield estimate. So keeping track of all the components of the yield, that's what this dynamic situation presents. And this could be done also retrospectively. So you can look back at your field from last year, get your data, the imagery already exists, and analyze it. Create a baseline, see which fields performed worse than better, which field you should benchmark against. So this dynamics loop enables you to do things today. Let's talk about that in a little bit. And let me ask you this, Matt. So you've looked at the dashboard, you've looked at the emails, which is super helpful, or the idea to get the communication over to your growers. So this is a case where, for example, you were looking at multiple fields and you're able to track over time, for example, looking at May, looking at June, what emerged. Could you walk us a little bit through what the dashboard information provide for you, and then we can talk a little bit about the emails as well and how that helped. What did you do with it? What was your workflow?
Yeah, on the dashboard, I used it the most at the end of the season, and I would pull up like our last imagery flight collection date as crops had started to senesce and had been senescing, and I would take each grower under my management, and I'd use that biomass and DBI column right there on the right, and I would rank it from highest to lowest, and I'd give them um, a crop specific harvest timing report where maybe they could go or kind of direct them to fields that are most likely drier and had been dried down longer than some of the other ones. So some of my growers are in some of their fields are 50 minutes apart in a 65 mile per hour drive, and so when you're moving machinery at 20, 25 miles an hour, it can take quite a few hours just to get from one end of the farm to the other. So by one way I was adding value to that service was to try and point them in the right direction on where they may look to start and get machinery to, as opposed to starting at one field only to find out that there's too many wet spots and that they need to go find another spot to harvest another field. So that was a pretty useful tool, I think, for the dashboard that I found benefits my growers.
So did you actually forward those emails, like they could reach you and they could reach your grower as well? Was that an opportunity for them to have visibility on how the big picture looks?
Yeah, so the crop performance email reports were really what I utilized the most, more so than the dashboard. And I would say that, when we're talking about timing being important, I was very happy with the timing that, I guess, the timeliness of the delivery of your reports. And most occasions, when we had a new image come in from Travion last year, I was getting your report in an email before I was even getting notified from Travion. So I mean, that even though you guys were getting your hands on it and running some analysis for us, like the delta analysis from change of 1 week to the next or 1 image to the next, even though you guys were applying some of your own analysis, I was still getting it a notification earlier than I was from the actual imagery provider. So I was very pleased with that. But what I used the email report the most for was it was a time multiplier for me. Prior to last year, I was taking raw images and creating screenshots and putting them into a slide, like a PDF, creating a PDF document and then sending that to my growers. And your emails took that. I mean, it cut in. It probably what took me 3 days work last year. I was doing in just a matter of hours with the automated reports, and then the service that we built around it was to look at every image as it came through and have a phone call with our growers and their agronomists. Even we've got a really good relationship with our local independent agronomists, and so we keep them in that kind of circle of trusted partners as much as we can, and we're honored to be in that circle with our growers as well. So we've always felt, as we built at Heartland, as we built imagery services, that it really needs to be services. It can't just be a pass through of information. I mean, we look at it much like a good analogy would be like going to the doctor when you're having your first kid. My wife, she's between 7 and 8 weeks until our first due date for our first kid. And when you first see the sonogram, it's confusing. You don't really know what's up, what's down, and it takes that professional that has an eye for it, a trained eye, to help you through that. And so we took that same concept with in-season imagery and applied it, and it's been very successful for us. Where we make sure that we look through every image and report on it. We're not just passing the information along. We're helping them understand exactly what's going on out there.
Yeah, and I think that's key in the sense of when you share that visibility with your grower, then you can pick up the phone after both of you of reviewing the email. You pick up the phone and you could call him, for example, be like, "What do you think is the reason in that area? Let's go scout it." If you're closer, you go look at it. Is that something that you did with the emails?
Absolutely, yep. And those conversations really help to build that relationship and that lasting relationship between you and your customers. And it builds a level of trust and authenticity when you're really taking your time to make sure that you're doing everything you can to help them along with the tools that you have. So absolutely, it is a virtual handshake is um, a very good one-liner to call it, and that's exactly how we used it.
So Mike, what are the top three points or top three things you want to share with the agronomists that are starting to use precision ag and getting into the virtual agronomy applications? What are the three things that you want to share with them? Things to take to use, things to be aware of?
Yeah, since timeliness is important, and that's kind of our topic, having things set up in advance, kind of getting your program established and figuring out what tools you find valuable or that your growers would find valuable is a good kind of step one and a big step. And having that all ready to go when the growing season's here will be very beneficial to you and your customers. I felt like we're really to the point now where we've got a program dialed in very well with the technologies and the tools we use, and they cover a lot of the steps of the growing season. So that would definitely be one of my, I guess, tips and advice. Another one is, I guess, especially with imagery, not all images are created equal, and there's limitations, and there's things that you just have to learn and educate yourself on to really be able to utilize it properly. I think, especially when drones hit the scene, there's a lot of misinformation on imagery and how you can use it. So learning really learning about the tools that you're going to be using is very important. One of them would be like I think a good example would be imagery that's not corrected for to be analyzed over a series of time. So if there's some imagery sources that are what we call passive, and then there's active sources of like an NDVI collection. So Green Seeker has its own power source, a laser. So it doesn't matter how bright it is outside or if it's overcast. You're going to get the reading's always going to be what it is with an active sensor. Most sensing devices that we're using is passive, so that it's utilizing that sunlight to create the reflectance back to the camera so it can capture that image. And if you're basically it's really your exposure. If your exposure isn't adjusted for a consistent level day to day, then you can't make those comparisons over time. The crop may look good one day because it's really sunny and not so great the next, because it's slightly overcast.
We do talk about the calibration and all of
Yeah.
that you need to account for. As a reminder, if anybody's interested in the drone kind of data set, to download the drone guide and go through it, because we touch base on that and we talk about calibration.
Yeah. And then I think the last one would just be try kind of like what I was leading up to here a little bit ago, is try to create a service around the tools. It's when we're talking about agronomy and there's agriculture and just growing a crop is such a dynamic venture, and there's lots of variables that go into it. Um, so try to bring as much of it that you're comfortable with together to create value. Don't just if you're using the tools for agronomy, I mean, don't just sell the tool, really sell the service and the insights that you can gain, or the information that you can build from the tools. Something we've built internally at Heartland is we call it a 375 program, but it's using data sets to their fullest extent. At least to the fullest extent that we're comfortable with yet. It's probably not the absolute fullest. There's just so much to the information that we're gathering, but we're really to the point where we're utilizing yield data really well now. And I think for a long time it's just kind of been there and it's been collected, but it hasn't been applied.
It's important to use it, not just collect it, but combine it and use it. And we
so we're taking as applied information with yield data, with the soil information, and we're grid soil sampling to establish our baseline, and then we're taking multiple years of yield data and creating normalized yield maps to create production zones, areas that we want to target for higher yields and areas that we don't, because over the course of any number of years in the past, it just hasn't been, maybe it just hasn't been a very productive area. So the concept's just kind of, why try and grow 200 bushel corn there when it's only grown 140 bushel corn. And after we take that baseline to know that the soil is in balance, that the nutrients are there, that it needs to be there, that's just all that soil is going to produce. So there's no sense in using excess nutrients that are just going to end up washed away and degrade our watersheds. So really trying to put the right things in the right spot for the right reason is really what we're doing. And it takes a lot of data to do that. I mean, as efficiently and to make sure you're doing it for the right reason.
So what you said is get the right data. What you said is build a service around the data and analytics, and make sure that you're collecting the right data and using it and enhancing this loop and including the agronomist. We're actually running out of time. I have one question in the live questions. Someone is asking, Leandro, thanks for your question. What are the specific use cases when satellite is not enough and aircraft and UAV become the necessary tools? So I think the biggest thing when it comes to the case of satellite is not enough is when you're looking for identifying individual trees. So a 10-meter resolution, for example, trees. In a 10-meter resolution, about 3 trees are all going to be bulked into 1 pixel. You would want to look into UAV if your application tells you, I want to see every tree individually, or I want to see every flower individually. So use the rule of thumb that says, what am I looking at? Go backwards. Am I looking at something of what size? And I at least need 3 pixels to cover that size. Thanks for your question, Leandro. I've got another question saying, what experience do you have there using the Imagery satellite in wine grape crops? In vineyards, it's one of the high value crops. There's a lot of intensive technology that goes on in vineyards and in viticulture. Imagery is a big part of it. Imagery coming from sensors that have a lot of the red edges bands specifically. Those are used to find early stresses. Also cameras that have thermal capability. You would use imagery on a drone to be able to identify when Verizon starts. That's a big application in viticulture. Another question we got was talking about how different crops and diseases is an indicator that detects. What about pests and diseases as any indicator that detects the problem? So yes, imagery can help us find stressed areas, can help us find areas that are performing or looking different. And that's where you as an agronomist and your scouting team will go to the field and scout it and diagnose it. That's where that data set that you're capturing, Matt, with the pest numbers.
Yeah, crop safe, absolutely. That's where that comes in. Just like in your example where you're you're using weather data and the imagery together to assess that it was a rainfall event. In that case, you'd use Imagery and in-field pest detection sensors, or like the network that we've established. And there's some that are coming out, hitting the market now for diseases even that are able to identify and quantify diseases as they move through areas that we're looking at as well.
Exactly. Putting all the different pieces of the puzzle need to all come at the right time. You have a piece of information, you take action. Please leave today's webinar with this take-home message. It's not one layer that says it all. It's a combination. And I apologize. We've been 10 minutes extra. So sorry, Matt. if dinner's
That's okay.
Thank you everybody for joining us. See you next week, same time, same link, next Thursday. We're gonna be talking in session 3 and we're gonna be talking nitrogen. So see you next week. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Matt. It was really enjoying
no problem.
on the call. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you guys.
Bye everybody. Thank you.
All the QAs offline. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.